What's up, guys? It's Dan from Coin Bureau Trading. Today I'm going to be answering a bunch of your questions. It's going to be a very fun video and one that you definitely want to watch until the end. If this is the kind of content that you enjoy, then be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ping that notification bell. Before we get started, do keep in mind that nothing in this video is financial advice. It's just my personal analysis of the crypto market. Your analysis could be different, and if it is, that's awesome, because the more difference of opinion that we have, the better traders and the better investors we're all going to become. So I'm just going to apologize in advance, guys, because I'm going to be bouncing between a whole bunch of tabs here, but I'll be going through as many questions as I can. Of course, if you do have more questions, feel free to drop them down in the comments of this video, and maybe I'll do a part 2 in the future if people enjoy this one. Anyways, so first question comes from Christy. Outlook for SEI in December, thoughts on Q1 2026 for altcoins. So for SEI and for most altcoins going into the end of December, I actually think, or rather I hope, that they'll be rallying up to the Bollinger Band moving average on the monthly. I think that'll either happen in December or maybe in January. For SEI, that level is currently around 30 cents. So roughly a 2x for SEI, let's say going into the end of the month, maybe sometime in early January. That would be my expectation for SEI, and that would also be my expectation for altcoins basically at the start of Q1. And I do think that altcoins will have a pretty nice Q1, but I'll probably have to save an in-depth analysis of that for another video. Okay, so please go more in-depth about why CME gaps get filled most of the time. I'll actually be doing a video about that as well. Actually, that video will probably be out by the time you see this video, but just as a quick, I guess, TLDR, is that the reason why CME gaps form is basically because you have institutional investors that are doing a basis trade using the CME futures. So basically, hedge funds will, or like institutional investors, hedge funds, they will buy Bitcoin on the spot market, and then they will short Bitcoin, and then they basically make basically profits from the fees and from kind of like the differences between those two prices. But what basically happens is that when you get a deviation between the spot price and the futures price, which tends to happen over the weekend, then this basis trade that institutions are doing basically kind of breaks, I guess is the simplest way to explain it. And the result is that institutions, basically to fix that trade, they basically need to push prices down or push prices up to fill that CME gap so that that basis trade is kind of fixed, if that makes any sense. I know it's a little bit complicated, but it's a dynamic that's actually, is not beneficial to investors or traders, and it's also not beneficial to the institutions because it kind of forces them, like they're basically forced, I don't want to say to manipulate, but they're forced to push the prices back into line with what they were doing with the basis trade to stay profitable, which is annoying, and it can sometimes cost money, as you can imagine, right? To push the price down or push the price back up to fix that kind of basis trade. So that's the question about CME. Again, I'll be doing a video about that. Probably will be out by the time you see this, so be sure to check the channel. In coin terminology here from Frederick. In coin terminology, the word soon is used loosely for anywhere between 1 to 12 months to 15 years. What's your probability take on alt season breakout being 2025 versus 2026? I personally think that we're going to get an altcoin. Well, I guess I'll show you guys here. I personally think we're going to get an altcoin season here probably in the next couple of months. This has to do with the rotation between different phases. Since the spring of 2025, we've arguably been in phase 2, maybe chopping with this phase overlap here between Ethereum and Bitcoin. But I do think that in the coming weeks and in the coming months, we're going to see that rotation into large caps and eventually into small caps. And when you look at things through the lens of phases rather than looking strictly through the lens of time, you start to realize, wait, we're probably still, I wouldn't say that we're early in the cycle by any means, but we're, there's still, let's say, a couple of months left, at least based on this kind of flow chart here, if that makes any sense. So I would say in the next few months, whether that starts later this month or early next month, I honestly don't know in terms of the timing, but I would say that the chances of an altcoin season are higher into early 2026 than they are in late 2025, granted that there's only a few days left of late 2025. Anyways, can you talk about Powell mentioning quantitative easing yesterday and what effect, if any, that could have on crypto? That probably gives it away that I'm filming this video in advance here, but when it comes to Powell, doing the quantitative easing, of course, a lot of people would argue that that's technically not QE because the Fed is basically just restoring liquidity to the markets. They're not like purposely, because QE, technically speaking, is that they're intentionally trying to basically push down interest rates to kind of stimulate. What the Fed is doing currently is technically not that. So it's technically not QE, but it is supportive of liquidity. So it's one of these, QE, not QE type of situations where the Fed is providing liquidity, but officially, technically, they are not doing QE. So people are saying, no, we're not doing QE, but arguably it is kind of helping out and bullish for the markets. What do you think about Linea and Ethena? So this is where things get interesting. I actually am kind of bullish on Linea. For those of you who don't know, Linea is this layer 2 that was launched by Consensus, which is the company behind MetaMask. And of course, Consensus is kind of like, let's say, this company in Ethereum's ecosystem that's built, I don't want to say most of its critical infrastructure, but a lot of its critical infrastructure. And what's really interesting, guys, is that in contrast to most layer 2s on Ethereum, Linea actually has a buyback and burn mechanism for the Linea token. So all fees on Linea are like they're basically split between buying and burning ETH, or rather just burning ETH because the fees are paid in ETH, and then buying and burning Linea tokens. And you can see that since the start of November, we've started to see, well, now there's around $500,000 of Linea that's been bought back and burned. And of course, the more traffic there is on Linea, on Ethereum's layer 2, on this layer 2, then we're going to see more and more Linea being burned. And that's something that I'm kind of bullish on. And same idea when it comes to Ethena. Ethena's potential ultimately depends on the demand, basically for the how do I explain this? Ethena makes kind of like it generates its fees when people are going long, is the simplest way of explaining it. When people are going long on exchanges, Ethena is making money. And of course, when people are not going long on exchanges, then Ethena is not making money. And of course, these days, not many people are going long. And you can see that since this October 10th liquidation, the supply of USDE, which is kind of backed by combination, it's basically doing this basis trade that I explained a few moments ago, but it's being done in crypto, and they attach a stablecoin to it. A little bit complicated, but point being is you can see that since this October 10th liquidation, USDE, Ethena stablecoin, the supply has basically been cut in half. And that's basically because less people have been going long since that time. All that leverage got wiped out. So as soon as you start to see USDE supply rising again, this is probably going to be bullish for Ethena, because as that supply starts rising, that means that there's more fees being generated from the longs, more basically revenue going to the Ethena protocol. And some of you guys might know that we're still waiting for Ethena to implement an actual fee switch. So it's been in discussion, but it technically hasn't been implemented yet, at least not at the time of shooting. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And I suspect that they will implement it once USDE supply is starting to rise rapidly again. That's probably when they're going to implement the fee switch. And that would be very bullish for Ethena, because you're basically going to see, I don't know what the details are, probably like another buyback and burn or something like that. So is Bitcoin worth holding long term, say 5 to 10 years? Is there growth in retail? So this is where things get interesting. Of course, what most people don't know is that most of the demand for Bitcoin from the spot ETFs has actually been coming from retail. Of course, there is some institutional involvement there, but it's mostly institutions that are doing that basis trade that I just explained. They'll buy basically the spot Bitcoin ETF, and then they'll go short basically on the CME, and they'll do that kind of spread trade that I was just talking about. So most of like that 20% or 10 or 20% of institutional demand is just like high frequency traders. It's not people that are holding for the long term. Whether Bitcoin is worth holding for the long term, I mean, I'll pull up this chart here on the monthly, and I guess it kind of tells you everything you need to know. You know, if I was to show you this chart, and I was to say it was a chart of something else, like, you know, some other asset that you can see has just been going straight up and to the right over the last few years, you know, I would ask you, you know, like, would you buy this chart at this level? You'd probably say, well, maybe at the current level, you know, like now that it's fallen a bit, you might say, yeah, maybe I would, like as a trade. But to hold it long term for 5 years or 10 years, you could make the argument that, maybe in the next, let's say until the next cycle, maybe Bitcoin will have another leg higher. But you can see that basically since 2017, there's been lower highs in terms of the RSI, that Bitcoin is kind of losing momentum over the years as its price goes higher, which makes sense because there's less and less people willing to buy it, you know, at a price of 100,000 or 150,000 or 200,000. And eventually it'll just get to a price where people are saying like, that's just too expensive, even though you can buy fractions, right? But most people don't understand that. And the result is that people will be like, well, you know, I'm not going to bother, like I can't afford it, or there's this perception that they can't afford it, or they just don't want to buy it. So, you know, for 5 to 10 years for a long-term hold, like multi-decade, I would not personally advise that. Of course, not financial advice, but it's not something that I will be doing personally. If you guys are enjoying the video so far and you're thinking of like some potential trades, you know, some of my analysis here is giving you some trade ideas, then do check out the top link in the description, BitGet up to 50,000 USDT deposit bonus. When you click on that link, it'll take you to a page that looks like this. It takes 2 seconds to sign up. You'll see that, yes, the Coin Bureau does have a partnership with BitGet, but on a personal note, I do think that BitGet is an awesome exchange. That doesn't mean that you should be keeping your crypto on BitGet or anything like that. You always need to be keeping your crypto on your personal wallet if you're not actively trading it. But that being said, like BitGet has spot trading, futures trading, they have on-chain trading, they have tokenized stocks, they have AI trading, a whole bunch of different features. And again, it's completely free to sign up and make an account. So I would suggest, you know, just make an account, see if you like it, and if you have enough trading volume, then you will be eligible for these bonuses. And again, the link to all of that will be in the description. So that's the questions from YouTube, guys. So now we can move on to the questions from X. First comment here from Luis. And sorry, like I've just realized I forgot to say the names of all the people, but it's my first time doing this, so you know, we'll improve as we go along. So question from Luis, is buying and holding dead? How do I identify when we should pivot? Not talking about memes. So the question of whether buying and holding is dead, I really think depends on which crypto you're talking about. If you're talking about a crypto that's, in the top 10 or like the top 5, then probably holding is not dead, especially when you're talking about something like Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Solana, or even XRP for that matter, as crazy as it sounds. Like if you're dealing with these largest cryptos, then no, buying and holding is probably not dead. And anyone who's been buying and holding these cryptos since the start of the cycle has probably done pretty well, with the exception of Ethereum. Let's not go there. But how to identify when we should pivot? Well, of course, you need to be looking at, macro conditions such as liquidity. You need to be looking at crypto conditions like, like sentiment and liquidations and stuff like that. In terms of crypto, I would say the main thing to watch is like, is there some entity that is going bankrupt or could go bankrupt? Of course, the elephant in the room there is MicroStrategy. If you start to see that MicroStrategy really looks like it's going to start, selling its crypto, which by the way, guys, everyone's talking about MicroStrategy and worried about that, but there's other entities like Bitcoin miners or other treasury companies, like that's where you would see the stress first. So the moment that you start to see like multiple treasury companies and multiple Bitcoin miners starting to sell Bitcoin, that would kind of be the warning sign that things are really not looking good. And that, we see capitulation from those entities, it would basically suggest that, eventually it's going to find its way into bigger players such as MicroStrategy. And that's when you could be in trouble. So when in terms of pivoting, from these large cryptos, but of course, Bitcoin does lead the rest of the crypto market. The next question here is one that I think I've answered already 2 or 3 times, but I even dedicated whole videos to it, basically for in 2017, the altcoin season, a small amount of money was needed. In 2020, 2021, people were locked in due to COVID. Now we need more money and people to pump. My question is, who's going to buy alts with no ETFs? So I guess long story short is that, everyone assumes that, there's more altcoins and there's not enough liquidity, but this isn't true. The number of altcoins that people are actually, how to explain this? Basically, most of the altcoins that are being launched are just like meme coins that are being traded by bots. It's not draining liquidity. Like all these millions of tokens you hear about, it's basically just dead tokens that no actual real people have ever bought or sold. It's all just bots. And there's only a small number, I think something like 20,000, let's say 10 or 20,000 cryptos that people are actually trading. And the number of cryptos has only increased by around 2x. We can see that the rally in stocks proves to us that there's no shortage of retail capital, something I've explained many times. And when it comes to the question of, like who is going to buy the altcoins with no ETFs, this is something that I kind of explained before, is that when it comes to how liquidity flows into crypto, it doesn't look like this, where it's like, one guy pouring into each cup. It looks more like something like this, where the liquidity flows first into Bitcoin, then it goes into Ethereum, and then it goes into all the other cryptos. So, in my view, I think it's actually very bullish when you have, for example, an Ethereum ETF or a Solana ETF, because that increases the value of Ethereum, the value of Solana, and that liquidity basically flows into Ethereum's ecosystem and flows into Solana's ecosystem, especially when you consider that all these altcoins on these chains, they trade against Ethereum and Solana. So in a scenario where you basically have, let's say Ethereum is priced at, let's say $3,000, and then you have some altcoin on Ethereum that's trading against it, and now let's say that Ethereum's price doubles, the price of that altcoin will double, all else being equal, even if no one is buying or selling it, because the value of the denominator has increased. So this is why, in my view, it's only important that the largest altcoins that are used in trading, like or used in like DeFi and trading in DeFi and stuff like that, so Ethereum, Solana, BNB, so long as these ones have a lot of liquidity coming in through the ETFs, then this is enough to cause the altcoins on those chains to pump. It's enough for that liquidity, to find its way into those altcoins on those chains. And of course, if you're dealing with an altcoin that has its own layer 1, is like, on some offshore exchange and doesn't have an ETF, then yes, that's an altcoin that's probably going to have a harder time pumping. Next question here from Mika. When could a potential altcoin season start? What is your current view on Aptos, Helium, Osmosis, and cryptos? So when it comes to when an altcoin season could start, this is something I think I've mentioned as well, is to look at the US dollar index. Basically, we need to see the US dollar index start dropping sharply. That's what's been happening. I mean, at the time of shooting, it's currently happening. Hopefully, it's still happening by the time you see this video, but we basically need to see the US dollar index fall below somewhere around 98.5 on the weekly. It needs to really be dropping below that level for altcoins to start to catch a bid. If the US dollar index goes above 100 on the weekly, it gets like a weekly close above 100, then that would be very bad. And that would suggest that basically the altcoin season is not going to come and that the crypto bear market is starting. And when it comes to Aptos and all these other cryptos, like Osmosis and whichever one, the other ones here, Helium and Osmosis. So of course, a lot of these altcoins have been struggling. Of course, this is something I've explained many times as well, is that when it comes to Aptos, my thesis was very simple. You can see that Aptos has been trading in a range for the last, whatever it is, like 3 years, 2 or 3 years. And my thesis was very simple: accumulate at the bottom of the range, wait until prices get to the top of the range, either to take some profits, or we get a break above that range, and then we just get a completely, a massive move to the upside. But of course, we get this kind of deviation to the downside. Everyone thinks that it's over. But I would say that at the minimum, I do expect Aptos to rally up to retest the Bollinger Band moving average on the monthly, because just from a purely technical perspective, that needs to happen. Even if Aptos is going to go all the way to zero, it needs to retest this level, which is currently around $6, which would be close to a 3x from the current level. Hopefully, it's a little bit higher by the time you see this video, but it's a similar story, whether it's for osmosis or for helium. That monthly Bollinger Band moving average is a level that will need to be, that I think will be tagged and needs to be tagged from a technical perspective. And I think it will be tagged because of the basically positive, I think, flows we're going to get going into the end of December, into January, and into the new year, that whole Santa rally, which I'll be doing a whole video about. Going back to the questions here. So should we hold SUI at this point in the market? I'm painfully confused. SUI is a kind of funny one because it's technically kind of just holding. I mean, it found support somewhere around $1.5. It's just been chopping around this level now for the last few weeks. And of course, the chart looks really brutal, but as you can see, like, SUI has been in a long-term uptrend since late 2023. So as crazy as it sounds, like, yes, there's been a lot of volatility, but you can see very clearly that there's been lower highs all along the way, with the exception of this, liquidation on October 10th. So I do think that just like all the other altcoins here, at the very minimum, I would expect SUI to rally up to the Bollinger Band moving average on the monthly to retest that level. That would be somewhere around $2.5. And I would go as far as to argue that I think the Bollinger Band moving average on the weekly will be retested, because that also hasn't happened, and that's also, somewhere close to $3. So that would be my kind of a bare minimum target. Even if SUI is going to enter a bear market here, it would rally back up to that level, which, from the lows, it would be close to a 2x, which is, not too shabby, let's say. Hopefully it's close to that level by the time you see this video. What do you think of Bittensor? Actually, very interesting. So Bittensor, and I apologize, like, I'm gonna have to, there's so many questions. Maybe we'll do a part 2 at some point. I mean, just drop your questions again in the comments, and I'll definitely do a part 2 if you guys enjoy it. Because there's so many things I could say about this, and I'm thinking, man, like, I have to be very careful. I can't spend 5 or 10 minutes answering every question. But you can see here that what's really interesting about Bittensor, we're looking at it through the lens of market cap. You can see that historically speaking, a rally in Bittensor would basically precede a rally in the rest of the crypto market. So that's what I find very interesting about Bittensor. And when we saw that rally kind of going in, I guess, into November, into late October, early November, I was hoping that we would see a rally. Basically, it was like foreshadowing a rally in the crypto market. And of course, Bittensor got basically pounded down, let's say. But I would watch Bittensor very closely as a potential signal for when other altcoins could rally, because historically through this cycle, it seems to have started rallying just before. And if you're wondering what I think of Bittensor in terms of a target specifically, I don't think it's going to go higher than somewhere, I don't know, let's say $500, $600. Maybe, if it can break above that $600 range, let's say, because you can see it's also kind of been chopping in a range. If it can break above $600, then yes, it could get close to 1,000. But I don't think, especially with the increase in supply, and there's a lot of insiders and a whole bunch of stuff, I don't think that Bittensor is going to go as high as people are expecting. Moving on now, guys, to questions from the Discord. This question comes from Dave. What outlook should the investor have who is heavily in altcoins and does not see a decent exit possibility? By what time would large blue chips like SUI, say Aptos, etc., recover if we do get a bear market? You can see quite a few people reacted to that question. Of course, it's a very frequently asked question, which I can summarize as, I'm massively underwater in altcoins. When will these altcoins recover? And the short answer is that it really depends on the altcoin. But I do believe that in the coming months, and again, I guess I can go back to one of the charts here and show you guys that on the monthly chart, I do think that most altcoins will be rallying back up to the Bollinger Band moving average on the monthly, especially the larger ones. For smaller ones, that's a little bit less certain. But of course, for a lot of people, that wouldn't necessarily be a full recovery. But what I do think, for whatever it's worth, I do think that we will see a rally higher as a result of upcoming catalysts, namely the Clarity Act. Just to recap, some of you guys might remember that in July, the Genius Act caused Ethereum's price to spike by around 50% over the course of 2 months. I think that the Clarity Act is going to have a similar impact on the broader crypto market, and just simply because it's a very similar catalyst to the Genius Act. And of course, the Genius Act is the only bullish crypto catalyst that has had an impact on prices over the last year. So my assumption is very simple. If the Genius Act caused the crypto market to explode higher, especially altcoins, then I think the Clarity Act will do the same. And I think it'll have an even bigger impact on altcoins, because whereas the Genius Act was specific to stablecoins, which is something more related to Ethereum, the Clarity Act is more general crypto market structure, which is more, let's say, specific to altcoins. Another question here comes from Octavius. He proposed a couple of questions. Let's assume altcoin price action in 2025 has been caused by issues in private the private sector. I guess it's in private credit specifically, or a power struggle between onshore and offshore camps. Also assume a positive macro scenario in the following months. However, the crypto specific reasons just remain in place. In this scenario, is it possible to have an alt season or at least a half coin season? In the case of a half coin or mild altcoin season, what would be realistic to expect regarding others, a lower high or higher high? And will this be likely restricted to a few selected coins, narratives like in the Trump rally or a more broad rally like in the spring of 2024? So the simplest way or shortest way I can answer that is that I think that the issues in private credits hopefully have been alleviated by the Fed's recent kind of like, stimulus, not stimulus, QE, not QE. And when it comes to this kind of potential power struggle within the crypto market, I think that this is probably over because basically CZ's wife, Yeehee, has become the co-CEO of Binance. And it sounds like this is something that CZ really wanted. So that's already kind of been basically, I think, resolved potentially. And I don't think it's a coincidence that from the moment that Yeehee became co-CEO of Binance, we've started to see crypto prices bottoming, starting to bounce, starting to recover. I don't think that's a coincidence personally. And then regarding this target for others, lower high, higher high, I think that there's going to be a broader altcoin season so long as we see a drop in Bitcoin dominance. That will correspond to a broader altcoin season. And again, the trigger for that from a crypto perspective would probably be the Clarity Act, and a trigger for that from a macro perspective. Sorry, I had to find the chart here. The trigger for that from a macro perspective would be a drop in the US dollar. So we get a continued drop in the US dollar, a continued drop in Bitcoin dominance, then we would see a broader altcoin season, basically going into, let's say, early 2025, with some crypto catalysts again helping out with bring attention and capital into crypto, which is actually a perfect segue into the final question, which is comes from FEMAP. Here's my question: what reasons would make it improbable that new liquidity slash stock profits slash metal profits rotate into crypto? I think the short answer, I guess let's say the most extreme answer, is that some kind of let's say exogenous shock, something that causes a lot of uncertainty in the markets, such as purely hypothetically, some large earthquake or something, or some natural disaster that causes investors to be scared, and instead of rotating their profits instead of liquidity flowing into risk assets or stocks profits rotating into risk assets, or metal profits rotating into risk assets, people are like, screw that, I'm not going to allocate to anything here. I'm going to wait and see what's going on with this exogenous shock until it calms down. So I guess in the most extreme scenario, some exogenous shock, because again, like it's natural and normal for liquidity to flow out the risk curve, especially when everyone is focused on the large caps. The large caps stop seeing like as big of gains, so people start looking around, where can I allocate money next, and they start kind of moving into other asset classes, and then that's basically how rotation happens. And the reason why it would be likely, in my view, in the case of crypto, is because it's adjacent to this AI and all these other frontier technologies that have attracted a lot of attention and capital. And especially when you start to get the Clarity Act passed and all this tokenized real world assets and stuff like that, that's probably going to bring a lot of more attention and capital to crypto. But I guess the caveat is, I guess it ties into this whole idea, is there some structural issue in the crypto market? One thing that could potentially, let's say, disincentivize liquidity from flowing into crypto could be some kind of internal turbulence, which again, I'm hoping has been resolved with Yeehee becoming the co-CEO of Binance earlier this month. So hopefully that's been kind of resolved. And then on the private credit front, I hope that also in that case, the Fed's recent liquidity, not QE, has also helped, quell some fears on the private credit side that could have been spilling over into crypto. So I guess long story short, exogenous shock, or that that crypto prices continue just being suppressed, and that no amount of positive news or anything is enough to push crypto prices higher, which again, that's kind of what we've seen, some would argue, for like the last year. In the first half of the year, that was arguably due to basically uncertainty in terms of tariffs and stuff like that. But then in the second half of this year, it looks like it could have been some issues in private credit, or because of some basically power struggles within the crypto market. And for what it's worth, those power struggles seem to be over. And I do think that even on the private credit front, I think things are hopefully being slowly resolved there. But we'll have to wait and see. If you had to ask me though, like which of those two factors is more important, I would definitely say internal fights within crypto have a bigger, more profound impact than private credit, for the simple reason that everyone forgets that most of crypto is dominated by retail and crypto whales, which includes like people like CZ and other like probably people that we don't even know the names of, right? Anyways, guys, if you did make it this far and you did find that information helpful, and then be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, ping that notification bell, and I'll see you in the next one.